The chapel smelled of wet wool, cold stone, and candle smoke when Duke Alaric Wexford bought himself a wife for £8,000. Clara Ashbourne stood beside him with blue lips, thin gloves, and a bridal veil that trembled each time her chest fought for breath. He married her before witnesses, took her fortune before breakfast, and sent her away before anyone could call it cruelty. This is a story of broken vows, quiet rebellion, and a woman who refused to die where she had been hidden. The rain came slantwise against the chapel windows, turning the grey morning into a sheet of running glass. Beneath Clara's satin slippers, the stone floor held the kind of cold that crept upward through bone. Orange peel and beeswax had been scattered near the altar to sweeten the air, but neither could cover the sharper smell of damp wool from the guests, nor the medicinal bitterness clinging to the handkerchief pressed inside Clara's palm. She had been told not to cough during the vows. Her aunt had said it while tying the veil. Her cousin had said it while pinning pearls into her pale brown hair. Even the physician, with his dry fingers and his bottle of dark laudanum, had said, "A quiet ceremony will serve you best, Miss Ashbourne." His Grace dislikes disturbance. His Grace disliked many things, Clara had already learned. He disliked drafts, debtors, weak horses, bad wine, and women who required patience. He had said as much the evening before, when her father's solicitor unfolded the settlement papers in the drawing-room at Ashbourne House and named the sum with careful pride. £8,000, Mr. Bell had said, tapping the parchment. Secured to the marriage, with certain provisions as discussed. The Duke of Wexford had not looked at Clara then. He had looked at the ink. "Enough to quiet the immediate inconvenience," he had replied. Clara had sat near the fire with a shawl over her shoulders, pretending not to understand that she was the inconvenience attached to the money. Her father had died 6 months earlier with gambling notes hidden beneath false bottoms in his desk. Her mother had gone years before him. The cousins who had kissed Clara's cheek that week had already measured her gowns, her silver brushes, and the small emerald cross she wore at her throat. Marriage had not arrived as romance, it had arrived as arithmetic. Now, at the altar, Duke Alaric Wexford stood tall and black-coated beside her, his profile carved from impatience. His dark hair was brushed severely back, his gloves were spotless. He gave his answers in a voice so calm it seemed to belong to a man agreeing to purchase timber, not bind himself to a living soul. "I will," he said. The words should have warmed something in her. They did not. When Clara's turn came, the vicar bent slightly, as if she might fail to hear him. She felt the eyes behind her, Lady Seraphina Vale in lilac silks smiling beneath her lashes, Lord Taversham whispering behind his programme, Aunt Morland breathing relief through her nose as though the burden of Clara's future had finally been lifted from the family carpets. Clara swallowed. The laudanum had left her tongue thick and bitter. "I will," she said. A small cough tore through her before she could stop it. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was only a broken sound caught in a fragile chest, yet the Duke's jaw tightened. Lady Seraphina lowered her fan, and her smile sharpened. "Poor thing," she murmured, just loudly enough for the front pews. "One does hope Ravensmere has a decent chapel ground." A few guests made the mistake of laughing. Clara kept her face lowered. She did not scream. Not yet, the ring was too large. It slid loosely over her knuckle, cold as pond water, and for one foolish moment she thought he might hold her hand a second longer because everyone was watching. He did not. His fingers released hers the instant duty allowed, and the space between them widened without either of them moving. Outside, the bells rang thinly in the rain. There was no wedding breakfast of warmth and toasts. There was a table, yes, laid in the long room with ham, sugared rolls, oysters, and a bride cake iced so white it looked embalmed. There were candles, footmen, crystal glasses, and 100 faces trained upon the new Duchess of Wexford to see whether she would faint before the first course. Clara did not faint. She sat straight, though her stays rubbed against her ribs and every breath seemed to scrape. The Duke stood at the far end of the room speaking with 2 men about a coal shipment and a mortgage. Lady Seraphina stood closer to him than any unmarried woman ought, her gloved hand resting on the back of his chair, as if the place beside him had always belonged to her. Clara noticed small things because great things were too dangerous to look at directly. She noticed that the Duke drank only half a glass. She noticed that her aunt avoided her eyes. She noticed that Lady Seraphina wore a pearl bracelet with a black enamel clasp, and that Alaric's gaze fell upon it once with recognition. She noticed, too, the sealed letter placed beneath her plate. No one else seemed to see it. The paper was folded small and pressed flat, the wax dark green, marked not with the Wexford crest, but with a simple line drawn through a circle. Clara touched it with 2 fingers before drawing her hand back as if burned. "Your Grace." She looked up. The Duke had come to her side at last. Up close, he was more imposing than handsome, though society had called him both. There were faint shadows beneath his eyes, and a small scar near his left temple, pale against his skin. He did not bow over her hand. He did not ask whether the ceremony had tired her. "The carriage is ready," he said. "So soon?" The roads worsened by afternoon. She looked toward the window, where rain beat hard against the glass. "I was told we would travel tomorrow. You were misinformed." Aunt Morland appeared with an expression arranged into sympathy. "It is for the best, Clara. Country air will be kinder to your constitution." "Ravensmere is country air?" Clara asked. Something passed across the Duke's face. Not guilt, not quite warning. "Ravensmere is quiet." Lady Seraphina laughed softly. "Quiet is precisely what her Grace requires." Clara folded her hand over the hidden letter beneath the plate. "And you, Your Grace? Do you travel with me?" The room seemed to hush before he answered. "No." A word could be a door closing. Clara heard it shut. "I have matters in London," he said. "You will be received by my steward. Mr. Vale is capable." "Vale?" Clara repeated, glancing once at Seraphina. "My brother," Lady Seraphina said, her smile too graceful to be kind. "He manages Ravensmere beautifully. You'll be in safe hands." The Duke's eyes remained on Clara. "You will have a housekeeper, servants, a physician if required, and every comfort suitable to your condition." "My condition," Clara said, his mouth tightened. "You are not well." "No, then do not make warfare of mercy." Mercy, the word settled between them like ash. Clara rose, because remaining seated would have looked like defeat. The room swayed, but she steadied herself with 2 fingers against the table edge. Beneath her touch, the linen was stiff with starch. Behind the sweetness of the bride cake came the salt smell of oysters and the coppery taste of anger at the back of her throat. "I would not dare, Your Grace," she said. "I understand I was not purchased for battle." For the first time that day, Alaric truly looked at her, not at the veil, not at the pallor, not at the fortune, at her. A flicker crossed his expression and vanished. "See that you remember it," he said. The inevitable bride would have wept then. She would have clutched at his sleeve, begged for kindness, asked what fault in her had earned exile before the marriage bed had even cooled. But the inevitable morning never came. Clara turned from him, lifted the sealed letter from beneath her plate, and slipped it into her glove. No one stopped her, no one asked what it was. Within the hour, she was wrapped in a travelling cloak lined with worn rabbit fur and handed into the Wexford carriage. Rain darkened the shoulders of the footmen. The horses stamped and snorted steam into the raw air. The Duke stood beneath the portico without a hat, black coat untouched by panic, while Lady Seraphina waited just inside the doorway where the weather could not spoil her silk. Clara sat against the squabs, the leather cold beneath her palms. Alaric stepped to the carriage door. For one moment, with the rain running from his hair, he looked less like a villain than a man pursued by something he refused to name. "You will remain at Ravensmere," he said. "Do not attempt London. Do not write to newspapers. Do not receive callers without Mr. Vale's approval. My letters are to be managed also, for your protection." Of course. His gaze dropped to her gloved hand. She did not move it. "Rest," he said. "It is what you are suited for." The door shut, the carriage lurched forward, carrying Clara away from the chapel, the breakfast, the husband who had bought her, and the woman who had smiled, as if she had already won. Only, when the house disappeared behind rain and elm branches did Clara draw the sealed letter from her glove. The wax cracked beneath her thumb. Inside were 7 words, written in a hurried, slanting hand. Do not drink what Vale gives you. The ink on the note had bled at the edges, as if the writer's hand had shaken, or the paper had been folded before it dried. Clara held it close to the carriage lamp, its flame jumping with every rut in the road, and read the 7 words again until they seemed less like warning than sentence. Rain hammered the roof with 1,000 small knuckles. The leather curtains smelled of old smoke, wet horse, and the sour wool of cloaks that had never properly dried. Clara's bridal shoes, never meant for mud, were already stained at the toes where the footman had lifted her over the chapel steps. The ring on her finger turned loosely when the carriage jolted. A golden hoop too large for a hand. No one had troubled to measure. She folded the note once, twice, then pressed it inside the lining of her glove. Her fingers would not warm. The cold had entered the carriage with her and taken possession like a creditor. Across from her sat a square travelling case bearing the Wexford crest. It had not been hers that morning. A maid had placed it at her feet as the horses were being harnessed. "For your Grace's comfort," the maid had whispered, eyes lowered. Inside were 2 nightgowns, 1 dark wool shawl, a bottle of cordial, and a small paper packet labelled in a physician's hand. Beneath them lay a silver spoon wrapped in linen, as if Clara were too ill to be trusted with ordinary table things. She touched the packet but did not open it. Its bitter smell had escaped the paper already. A draught caught in her throat. She turned her face away from the lamp and coughed into her handkerchief until the satin at her ribs felt too tight to bear. When she lowered the linen, there was a faint rust-coloured mark upon it. She closed her fingers around it before the maid seated outside could see. At the first posting house, near dusk, the carriage stopped beneath a dripping inn sign that creaked like a hanged man's boots. Voices moved beyond the door, the coachman asking for fresh horses, a groom swearing at the mud, someone laughing over a tankard. Clara remained inside, veiled and half frozen, while heat and lamplight glowed through the inn windows only feet away. No one invited her in. The carriage door opened at last, and not the coachman but a thin man, in a dark travelling coat, looked in at her. His face was long, his eyes pale, his hair tied neatly at the nape. He bowed with exact politeness. "Your Grace, Mr. Edmund Vale, steward of Ravensmere." The name struck against the note hidden in her glove. Clara kept her hand still in her lap. "We were told you were at the estate. I rode south to ensure your comfort upon the road." The word comfort had begun to sound like a padlock. Vale lifted the travelling case and opened it without asking. He selected the small paper packet and the bottle of cordial. "Dr. Hessel has advised a dose at each stop. The northern air can be cruel to delicate chests. My physician in London gave no such instruction. Your husband's physician did." Vale smiled. "His Grace is very attentive to necessary arrangements." Clara looked at the brown liquid in the bottle. It clung thickly to the glass when he tilted it, slow as treacle, dark as old blood. "I am not thirsty. It is not for thirst." He poured a spoonful. The smell was worse now. Licorice, poppy, and something metallic beneath the sweetness. Clara's pulse beat once at her throat, hard enough to hurt. She thought of the words hidden in her glove. She thought of Lady Seraphina's smile. She thought of the Duke saying rest, as if rest were a grave with curtains. Vale extended the spoon. "Drink, Your Grace." A maid's laugh in the inn-yard cut off abruptly. Somewhere beyond the carriage wall, a man said in a low voice, "The London note comes due before Michaelmas. If she lasts, the Duke is saved. If she doesn't, the matter is cleaner." Clara held herself still. Vale's pale eyes sharpened. "Did you hear something?" "No," she said. It was the first lie of her marriage. For a moment, only rain filled the silence between them. Then Vale leaned closer, close enough that she saw a nick in his shaving, close enough that his voice no longer needed courtesy. A young wife should learn quickly which refusals are harmless and which are remembered. Clara took the spoon. The liquid trembled in the shallow bowl. Vale watched her mouth. The coachman shifted outside. The horses stamped in the mud. Clara raised the dose slowly, then let another cough seize her before it reached her lips. Her gloved hand jerked. The spoon struck the carriage rug, and the dark medicine disappeared into the wool. Vale's smile vanished. "How unfortunate," Clara whispered, pressing her handkerchief to her mouth. He looked at the stained rug, then at her face. "There will be another dose at the next stop. I shall try harder to be obedient. See that you do." He withdrew, taking the bottle with him, but he forgot the torn corner of the packet on the seat beside her. Clara waited until the door shut and the bolt clicked. Only then did she pick up the scrap. On it, beneath the physician's label, was written a second name in a different hand. Seraphina Vale. The carriage lurched north again, and Clara understood that Ravensmere was not meant to be a home at all. Ravensmere appeared out of the rain like a punishment built in stone. Its towers rose black against a colourless dawn, and the whole house seemed to sweat damp from every joint, every chimney, every narrow window. Watching the carriage crawl up the drive, Clara sat with the torn scrap, bearing Seraphina Vale's name, folded beneath her wedding ring. Her body ached from the road. Her throat burned with every breath. Mud sprayed the carriage steps as the horses stopped before a portico where 2 footmen waited without livery coats, their sleeves shiny at the elbows and their faces pinched with cold. Mr. Edmund Vale opened the door himself. "Welcome to Ravensmere, Your Grace," he said. The words were correct. The smile beneath them was not. Clara placed one hand against the carriage frame and stepped down. The northern wind cut through her cloak as if the fur lining were gauze. A drop of water from the cracked portico roof struck her wrist and ran beneath her glove. Above her, ivy clung to the stone like black veins, and somewhere inside the house a shutter banged again and again, unanswered. A woman in a grey gown hurried forward and curtsied low. "Mrs. Wren, housekeeper, Your Grace." Clara saw the woman's hands first. Red knuckles, split skin, a needle mark in one finger wrapped with thread instead of linen. Mrs. Wren kept her eyes lowered, yet her gaze flicked once toward Vale and away. "You are chilled," Mrs. Wren said. "I've had a fire laid in the blue bedchamber." "Have you?" Vale asked softly. The housekeeper went still. Clara lifted her chin. "Then I am grateful for it." Inside, the entrance hall smelled of wet stone, old ashes, and something faintly spoiled. Rainwater gathered in a basin, placed beneath a leak near the stairs. A threadbare runner lay bunched at one corner, exposing black and white marble, cracked through the middle like broken teeth. Portraits of dead Wexfords stared from the walls, their painted lace and powdered wigs more richly kept than the living servants beneath them. A footman carried Clara's small case. The larger trunks, she was told, would arrive later. "When later?" she asked. "When the roads permit," Vale replied. Clara looked at him. "My gowns, books, writing box, and medicines were all sent with the second cart. Then they are at the mercy of the roads." The answer held a door shut. They led her through a corridor where the plaster had bubbled from damp. In the breakfast room, a maid was lifting a cover from a dish of eggs gone grey at the edges. On the sideboard lay a loaf cut so thinly each slice curled. Clara noticed a silver teapot with a dented spout, 3 spoons where there should have been 12, and a sealed letter resting beside Vale's plate. It bore the Duke's crest. Vale took it before she could read the direction and tucked it inside his coat. "Business," he said. A wife may not ask about her husband's business. A wife in delicate health should not trouble herself with burdens beyond her strength. Clara reached for the back of a chair. The polished wood felt sticky beneath her fingers. "Then perhaps you will tell me why the servants are wearing last year's black." A maid dropped a spoon. Vale's smile returned, slow and bloodless. "Her Grace has sharp eyes for a lady newly arrived." "My lungs are weak, Mr. Vale, not my sight." Mrs. Wren's mouth tightened as if she had caught back a sound. Vale poured tea. "The household has been economized. His Grace ordered restraint. At Ravensmere alone?" "At Ravensmere especially." Clara looked toward the window. Beyond the glass, a yard opened onto outbuildings with sagging roofs. 2 men rolled a barrel from a storehouse, and when its lid shifted, the smell reached even through the closed window. Grain turned sour, damp and furred with rot. "Is that wheat?" For the pigs, Vale said. There are tenants who will need bread before winter has finished. Tenants always need something, Your Grace. At that, Mrs. Wren's fingers tightened on the handle of the teapot. Clara took no tea, Vale noticed. His gaze lowered to the untouched cup, then to her mouth. You must keep up your strength. I intend to. He did not like the answer. By afternoon, Clara had been shown a bedchamber, where the wallpaper peeled behind the curtains and the fire smoked more than it warmed. A maid brought broth so thin the spoon reflected the ceiling. Another brought a warming pan with only 3 coals inside. From the passage, Clara heard whispers halt whenever her door opened. At Ravensmere, even silence seemed employed against her. She waited until dusk before asking for the rent books. Mrs. Wren stood near the hearth, pretending to arrange a coal scuttle that held almost nothing. The rent books, Your Grace? Yes, the estate accounts. If I am to remain here, I should understand the house. The housekeeper glanced at the door. Mr. Vale keeps those, then ask him to send them. Mrs. Wren swallowed. He will not. Clara looked down at the hearth. Ash lay in soft grey drifts where coal should have been. Servants in great houses were commonly paid at the quarter days, and Michaelmas had already passed. If wages had been held back since autumn, obedience in this house had not been loyalty. It had been hunger. Are you paid, Mrs. Wren? The woman's face emptied. A board creaked in the next room. Both women turned. The sound came again, measured and light, as if someone had shifted away from the wall. Mrs. Wren curtsied quickly. You must rest, Your Grace. That night, after the house had sunk into groans of timber and rain, Clara woke to a soft scratching at her door. She reached beneath her pillow for the torn scrap with Seraphina's name. Though paper could defend no one, Mrs. Wren slipped inside carrying no candle. In her arms lay a ledger bound in cracked brown leather. Dark stains marked the corner and had sunk deep into the pages. The housekeeper placed it on Clara's counterpane. Read quickly, she breathed, before he knows I've taken it. Clara touched the stain. It was not ink. Mrs. Wren bent close enough for Clara to feel the cold rain in her wool sleeves. The last mistress who questioned Mr. Vale vanished, she whispered, and Your Grace has already asked more than she did. The ledger left a brown ghost upon Clara's quilt where Mrs. Wren had laid it, and by morning that stain seemed to have spread into every corner of Ravensmere. Clara hid the book beneath the loose rush mat under her bed before the maid came in with her tray. The broth steamed weakly in a cracked bowl, carrying the smell of bones, boiled twice, and onions stretched beyond dignity. Beside it sat another cordial glass, half filled with the same dark medicine Mr. Vale had pressed upon her during the journey. The maid, a thin girl with freckles across her nose, kept her eyes on the tray. Mr. Vale said Your Grace must take it before breakfast. What is your name? Martha, Your Grace. Martha, open the curtains. The girl obeyed at once. Grey light entered the room, cold and watery. Clara lifted the cordial glass, held it near her lips, and tilted her head as if swallowing. Then, while Martha bent to stir the fire, Clara poured the medicine slowly into the ashes. It hissed faintly where it touched an ember. Martha turned at the sound. Their eyes met. Clara set the empty glass down. The girl said nothing, but her fingers shook as she picked it up. By noon, Mr. Vale came to inquire after her strength. He stood near the bed with his hands folded behind him, looking over the room as if counting what might be removed next. You seem improved, he said. I slept. The medicine served you. Then. It did what it was meant to do. His gaze rested on her face a moment too long. His Grace dislikes disobedience. My husband is in London. His Grace's wishes travel faster than his carriage. Clara pulled the shawl tighter around her shoulders and let her breathing remain shallow. Then you may tell him I am resting precisely as commanded. Vale bowed, but at the door he paused. Rest is most useful when it is complete, Your Grace. Too much ink and candle smoke can agitate the nerves. When he left, Clara waited until his footsteps faded. Then she rose, crossed the frozen boards, and drew the ledger from beneath the mat. By day, the sick room belonged to Vale. By night, it became Clara's office. Mrs. Wren brought what she could in scraps and bundles. 3 rent rolls tied in faded tape, tenant petitions smelling of smoke and sheep's wool, an apothecary's bill folded into a prayer book, and a list of grain shipments from the South Farm, copied in a groom's rough hand. Clara worked by the stub of a candle, wrapped in 2 shawls, her hair unpinned down her back to keep her neck warm. The figures were a language, and one by one they began to betray their speaker. Rents were marked paid, though tenants had signed complaints that Mr. Vale's men had collected twice. Coal deliveries were charged to the house, yet the servants' grates remained nearly empty. 12 sacks of barley had left Ravensmere home farm in November, but only 5 were entered as received at the granary. The missing 7 were marked as spoiled by damp. Though no carter had signed the loss, Clara traced the columns with one finger until the nails split at the edge. "Show me the apothecary bill again," she whispered. Mrs. Wren placed it before her. The bill listed tincture of opium, paregoric, cordial draughts, and powdered foxglove, each charged not to Clara's own account, but to the general household. In many houses, such bills were settled quarterly, after the steward approved every bottle and blistering plaster. Here, Vale had approved enough medicine for 3 invalids before Clara had even reached Ravensmere. Clara pressed her palm flat against the paper. "How long has Dr. Hessel supplied this house?" "Since Mr. Vale came," Mrs. Wren said. "Before that, Mrs. Alder sent for the village surgeon." "Mrs. Alder?" The housekeeper's mouth tightened. "The late steward's wife. She kept some rooms here after he died." "The mistress who vanished?" Mrs. Wren did not answer. From the passage came a soft click. Clara blew out the candle. Darkness swallowed the room. Mrs. Wren stood frozen beside the bed. Clara heard the boards outside give a faint complaint beneath someone's weight. Then silence. A paper slid beneath the door. Neither woman moved until the footsteps had gone. Clara crossed the room barefoot, the floorboards biting cold into her soles, and lifted the paper. It was sealed with plain red wax. No direction, no crest. Only her new title written across the front in a cramped hand to the Duchess if she wishes to live past Candlemas. Mrs. Wren touched the mantel for support. "Do not open it here." Clara looked at the wax, then at the ledgers spread across the bed. The bottle was not medicine. She tucked the unopened letter beneath her pillow and returned to the accounts. If terror wanted her attention, it would have to wait its turn. Near dawn, with rain tapping the glass like fingernails, Clara found the entry. It was repeated 6 times over 8 months, hidden among linens, wax and mourning cloth. Payment to SV, London, for household discretion. Below it, in Vale's hand, a second description had been scratched and rewritten. Ladies' maintenance. Clara stared at the initials until the room seemed to narrow around them. SV, Seraphina Vile. The woman in lilac silk, standing beside Alaric, as if Clara had been the intruder at her own wedding, had not merely mocked Ravensmere's dying Duchess. She was being fed from the house that starved its servants. Clara reached for the sealed letter beneath her pillow. Before she could break the wax, someone tried the handle of her locked door. The door handle turned once, stopped, and turned again with the slow patience of a man who believed all locks eventually surrendered. Clara stood barefoot on the cold boards with the sealed letter in one hand and the candle snuffer in the other. Her breath made a pale cloud before her mouth. Outside the window, sleet scratched against the glass, and inside the chamber the ashes held the sour stink of the medicine she had poured away. "Your Grace?" Mr. Vale called softly from the passage. "You are awake." Clara slid the ledgers beneath the counterpane and pressed the sealed letter into the hollow behind the bedpost. "A cough woke me. The physician's draught might have spared you. I shall remember your concern." His silence lengthened. The latch trembled once more, then stilled. "Locks are dangerous things in sick rooms," he said. "A servant may need to reach you. Then a servant may knock." The footsteps withdrew, but Clara remained motionless until Mrs. Wren slipped from behind the wardrobe screen, where she had hidden with both hands clamped over her mouth. The housekeeper's face looked grey in the dawn. "He knows," Mrs. Wren whispered. "Not enough." Clara crossed to the bedpost and drew out the letter. The wax broke beneath her nail. Inside, in the same cramped hand, was a list of names. Martha the maid, John Pike the carter, Mrs. Alder, and 3 tenants from the West cottages. Beside each name was a sum of money, a date, and one repeated phrase, silenced for arrears. At the bottom, a final line had been written harder than the rest. Ask who profits when the poor cannot pay twice. By breakfast, Clara had dressed in the plainest gown she owned, a dark blue wool that made her face look paler but kept the draught from her arms. She descended the main stairs with Mrs. Wren beside her, carrying not the stolen ledger, but the housekeeper's household book, which no steward could deny a duchess the right to inspect. In great houses, the lady's authority often began in linens, coal, candles, and kitchen stores. Men called it domestic management, but entire estates could be weakened or saved by what was counted there. In the servants' hall, conversation died as Clara entered. The laundry maid stood near the hearth with cracked hands wrapped in rags. A footman hid a torn cuff behind his back. Martha looked at the floor. The smell of lye, cold cabbage, damp wool, and fear lay thick under the low ceiling. Clara placed her small purse on the table. "How many wages are owed?" No one answered. Mrs. Wren lifted her chin. 2 quarters to the laundry, 1.5 to the kitchen girls, 3 months to the footman. The stable boys have had bread and no coin since Martinmas. Clara untied the purse. Her pin money had been meant for gloves, ribbons, charitable calls, and the small feminine expenses men liked to overlook. It had arrived with her settlement, protected in a narrow clause Mr. Bell had insisted upon. While the Duke was too impatient to object, she counted the coins onto the table. The first maid began to cry without making a sound. "This will not satisfy all," Clara said. "It will begin." Martha stepped forward with trembling hands. "Your Grace, Mr. Vale will say it is not allowed. Mr. Vale may explain to me why bread is forbidden in a starving house." By noon, she had ordered the granary opened. The key was not offered willingly. John Pike, the carter, whose name had appeared in the letter, brought it hidden beneath a sack of oats and placed it on the kitchen table as if laying down a weapon. Clara took it, felt its iron weight, and walked through sleet to the storehouse herself. Inside, 7 good sacks stood behind the moulded barrels marked spoiled. Clara looked at Pike. He swallowed. "Told us to keep 'em behind the bad lot, Your Grace. Said there was for sale in York. They are for Ravensmere." By evening, bread went to the West cottages. Coal was carried to the nursery wing, where 2 old maids slept under threadbare blankets. A mason from the village was promised payment to patch the worst tenant roofs before the next frost. Clara signed each order, with a hand that shook only after the ink dried. The house changed by inches. A footman stood straighter when Vale passed. Martha brought Clara hot water without being asked. Mrs. Wren placed fresh linen in her chamber and left a second candle beneath the folded sheet. In corridors where whispers had once stopped at Clara's approach, doors now opened a finger's width. Then Mr. Vale found the copies. It happened during the storm's full fury, when wind struck the north wall, hard enough to make the lamps gutter. Clara was returning from the granary, with her cloak soaked at the hem, when Vale appeared beneath the archway to the old service court, holding several pages in his hand. Her pages, the copied accounts. His smile was gone. "You have been busy, Your Grace." Clara's fingers closed around the granary key. "So has your pen." He stepped aside with a small bow. "There is a draught in the corridor. Come through the still room. It is warmer. It is not." His hand closed around her wrist before she could turn. The pain was sharp enough to steal breath. He pulled her across the threshold of the old still room, where cracked jars lined the shelves, and the air smelled of vinegar, dust, and dead herbs. Clara struck his sleeve with the key, but he twisted it from her hand and flung it into the dark. "You should have died politely," he said. The door slammed, a bolt shot home on the other side, and the winter storm swallowed her cry before it reached the house. The still-room cold was different from the cold of corridors and bedchambers. It had been stored there for years in stone jars, cracked tiles, and the sour breath of vinegar that clung to the walls. Clara stood with one palm against the locked door until the last vibration of the bolt had faded. The room held no fire, only a narrow, high window filmed with ice and shelves crowded with dust-dulled bottles. Rosemary hung from a beam in blackened bundles. A broken preserving pan lay overturned near her foot, and rain beat above the roof so hard the whole chamber seemed buried beneath water. She called once. No answer came. The cry tore at her chest and brought the cough after it, deep and scraping. She bent over, one hand gripping the edge of a table, the other pressed to her mouth. When the fit passed, her glove was wet. She folded it into her palm without looking. On the floor near the door lay the granary key where Vale had flung it. Clara knelt, reached for it, and felt pain run from wrist to shoulder where his fingers had bruised her. The key was iron, heavy and cold, but its teeth were wrong for the lock. "Think," she whispered. The shelves offered dead herbs, empty cordial bottles, a cracked funnel, old wax seals, a pestle with a chipped handle, and a wooden crate marked for pickled walnuts. Clara dragged it beneath the window and climbed, her damp skirts tangling at her ankles. The window was too high and too narrow for any grown woman to pass through, but a servant child might have managed it. She struck the glass with the pestle once, twice. On the third blow, a star opened in the pane. Wind entered like a hand around her throat. "Your Grace?" The whisper came from outside, small and terrified. Clara froze, pestle lifted. At the window, two dark eyes appeared below a ragged cap. It was Nan, the scullery maid who slept near the kitchens and carried ashes before dawn. Her cheeks were raw with cold, and sleet had silvered the loose hair at her temples. "Mrs. Wren sent me," Nan breathed. "Mr. Vale's in the steward's room. I took the outside path. Can you reach the bolt?" Nan looked down, then back at Clara. "There's a loose bar by the coal hatch. Fetch it." The girl vanished. Clara listened to the storm, to the bottles ticking faintly on the shelf, to the heavy silence beyond the locked door. A minute stretched long enough to become a life. Then iron scraped. The bolt groaned once, caught and lifted. When the door opened, Nan nearly fell inside with the bar in both hands. Clara caught her by the shoulders. The girl smelled of soot, onions and rainwater. "Good child," Clara said. Nan shook her head fiercely. "I'm not good, Your Grace. I'm frightened. So am I." That seemed to steady them both. They went through the back passage, not the main corridor. In the kitchen, the servants had gathered without speaking. Mrs. Wren stood by the table with a letter in her hand, its seal broken, its paper spotted where snow had melted into it. "It came from London by private rider," she said. Mr. Vale read it first. "Martha saw him leave it by the fire, and John Pike took it before it burned." Clara opened the page. Alaric's hand was angular and spare. "Vale, I return within 3 days. Lady Seraphina accompanies me. If her Grace has troubled the estate or exceeded domestic authority, Hessel will certify her nervous condition. Remove all books, correspondence, and household command until I decide the proper arrangement." The paper crumpled at Clara's fingers. Mrs. Wren looked away. Nan began to cry silently into her apron. A wife could be made a prisoner without bars. Clara laid the letter flat upon the table and smoothed it once. Her face had gone very still. Beneath the law of marriage, much of a woman's world passed into her husband's hands, yet settled money was a stubborn creature. If trustees had signed it, even a duke could not swallow every pound without leaving teeth marks on paper. "Mrs. Wren," Clara said, "send John Pike to the village before dawn. He is to ride to Mr. Bell, my father's solicitor, and put this into his hand alone." "With what message, Your Grace?" Clara went to the dresser, took ink, a quill, and one clean sheet kept for household orders. Her wrist ached so badly the first stroke shook, but the second did not. "Tell him the Duchess of Wexford requests immediate attendance at Ravensmere with the marriage settlement, the trustee's copy, and a witness who is not afraid of titles." She sanded the letter, folded it, and sealed it with a plain wafer from Mrs. Wren's drawer. "And the ledger?" the housekeeper asked. Clara looked toward the dark windows, beyond which the chapel roof rose like a black shoulder against the storm. "Not in my room. Not in yours. Not where Vale thinks women hide things." Before dawn, wrapped in a servant's cloak, Clara crossed the yard with Mrs. Wren carrying the lantern low. The chapel door groaned open, and cold incense, mildew and old stone received them. Beneath the third pew from the front, a floorboard lifted where damp had warped the nail loose. Clara slid the blood-stained ledger into the hollow and pressed the board back down. As they returned to the house, the storm eased at last. From the southern road came the distant crack of a postillion's whip. The post-chaise came through the mist with 4 horses blown white at the mouth, and Ravensmere seemed to draw one long breath before it reached the steps. Clara stood in the great hall beneath the antlered chandelier, her fingers resting on the polished edge of a small writing desk that had once been shoved against a wall for visiting cards. Now it held petitions, rent slips, receipts for coal, and a neat stack of household accounts tied with blue tape. The hall smelled of peat smoke, drying wool, fresh bread from the kitchens, and the sharp winter air that entered each time another tenant crossed the threshold. She wore the dark blue wool gown again, brushed clean and mended at the cuff. A shawl lay over her shoulders, not as a badge of invalid weakness, but because the hall was still cold despite the repairs. Mrs. Wren stood near the lower stairs. John Pike waited by the door, with his cap crushed in both hands. Martha moved between the tenants with a tray of small beer, her back straighter than it had been when Clara first arrived. The front doors opened. Duke Alaric Wexford entered his own house and stopped. That was the first victory. He had expected silence. He had expected a fading wife upstairs behind closed curtains, servants moving like ghosts, Vale's reports folded neatly for his approval. Instead, a farmer with mud on his boots was bowing to Clara. A widow from the West Cottages was showing her a roof estimate, and 2 boys carried ledgers from the estate room, as if obeying a command long established. Alaric's gaze passed over the patched plaster, the lit grate, the repaired runner, the servants, the tenants, the desk. Then it reached Clara. "Your Grace," she said. Her voice did not tremble, though one hand slid beneath the desk to grip the wood. Lady Seraphina Vale entered behind him, in travelling furs the colour of cream. Snow had jewelled her bonnet ribbons, and her mouth carried the same amused cruelty Clara remembered from the wedding breakfast. Edmund Vale followed last, his cheek pale where the cold had reddened everyone else. Alaric removed his gloves 1 finger at a time. "What is this assembly?" "A rent morning," Clara replied. It had been neglected. His eyes sharpened. Rent mornings are handled by the steward, formally." Vale stepped forward. "Your Grace, her Grace has overtaxed herself. I feared this might occur. There has been agitation, sleeplessness, and improper interference with estate matters." Clara opened the top account book. The page made a clean sound in the hush. "The North Pasture leases are reconciled," she said. "The West Cottages have received coal. The granary holds 17 sound sacks, after removal of the rotted barrels. 2 months' servant wages have been paid from my private allowance and entered here." A murmur moved through the tenants. Alaric looked at her hand, then at the accounts. "You used your pin money for wages. It seemed more useful than ribbon." Seraphina gave a soft laugh. How touching, a charitable invalid playing Duchess among the cottagers. No one else laughed. The silence that followed was colder than the road. Clara turned 1 page. "Mrs. Hartley, the roof estimate?" The widow stepped forward and placed a folded paper on the desk. Her fingers were rough, cracked at the knuckles, and she curtsied so low her patched bonnet shook. "Beg pardon, Your Grace." The rain came through over the cradle. Alaric's face altered by a fraction. Clara saw it. A man could ignore a ledger more easily than a cradle. "Has no repair been ordered?" he asked Vale. Vale bowed. "The woman exaggerates. Tenants often discover leaks when a generous lady is present." John Pike shifted near the door. His boots scraped the flagstone. From the side passage came the faint rustle of paper. Clara looked toward it. Mrs. Wren looked too. For a heartbeat, Clara thought it was the return from Mr. Bell, the solicitor's answer from London, the one letter upon which too much depended. But the footman who entered carried only a salver with an unopened envelope addressed to Mr. Vale. A red mark was scratched at the corner, the sign of a debt notice from a tradesman who had tired of waiting. Vale snatched it before Alaric could see. Clara saw Alaric notice that as well. She lifted another account sheet. "The York corn factor has not been paid. The apothecary has been overpaid. The coal merchant has received promises instead of coin. Yet certain London remittances have been made promptly. Seraphina's fan opened with a snap. You speak boldly for a bride who has been here barely a fortnight. I read quickly. A dangerous habit when one lacks strength. Clara placed both palms upon the desk and rose. The hall watched her rise with it. Every servant tenant and muddy child seemed to hold breath in one body. Alaric took one step toward her. Clara. It was the first time he had used her Christian name. She did not soften. Seraphina smiled beneath her lashes. Your Grace, forgive me, but this display proves only that your wife requires rest. A charitable invalid may be indulged. She cannot be obeyed. Clara looked across the hall at the woman who had been fed from its hunger. Then your ladyship won't mind, she said, if I read the accounts aloud. By dinner, every candle in Ravensmere had been lit, and the long dining room smelled of hot wax, roasted mutton, damp wool, and old fear dressed in silver. Clara had ordered the table laid formally, not for comfort, but for witnesses. Neighbouring gentry sat stiff-backed beneath the portraits. Mr. Bell, her father's solicitor, had arrived at dusk with a travelling cloak still wet at the shoulders and a leather packet locked beneath his arm. 2 local tenant farmers stood near the sideboard, uneasy in their Sunday coats. Mrs. Wren and the senior servants waited along the wall, not invisible now, not dismissed now. At the head of the table sat Alaric. At the other end stood Clara with the household accounts spread before her. Lady Seraphina rested one elbow beside her wineglass, the picture of bored elegance. Edmund Vale stood behind Alaric's chair, pale and correct, with one hand tucked into his waistcoat as if hiding its temper from the room. This is irregular, Vale said. So were the accounts, Clara replied. A faint sound moved through the servants. It was not laughter. It was breath returning. Alaric's gaze remained fixed on the papers. Proceed. Seraphina's fan opened and closed. How solemn we all are. One would think her Grace had discovered treason, not kitchen confusion. Clara lifted the first sheet. November. 12 sacks of barley left Ravensmere home farm. 5 were entered into the granary. 7 were marked spoiled by damp. John Pike, who drove the cart, swore before Mrs. Wren and Mr. Bell this afternoon that all 12 sacks were sound upon delivery. Pike's cap twisted in his hands. Aye, Your Grace. Dry as bone. Vell's voice sharpened. A carter's memory is not an account. No, Clara said. But a receipt is. She placed it on the table. Alaric leaned forward. Clara continued. The same 7 sacks were sold 3 days later in York under the name Alder & Co. The payment was not entered into the Ravensmere books. One of the neighbouring gentlemen cleared his throat. Seraphina looked down at her plate, then lifted her wine as though nothing in the room concerned her. Clara turned another page. December. Coal charged to the household. No coal delivered to the servants' wing. The coal merchant's debt remained unpaid, yet 2 remittances were made to London. Val gave a small laugh. Your Grace, ladies are often confused by household abbreviations. Then I am fortunate the steward wrote them plainly. She read the line aloud. Payment to SV, London, for household discretion. Seraphina's glass touched the table too quickly. Wine climbed the side and spilled over her glove. Clara did not look away from her. There are 6 such payments. That proves nothing, Seraphina said. It proves the servants went unpaid while your bills were honoured. My bills? Seraphina's voice cut like glass. You are ill, madam. No, I am married. The words struck harder than a shout. Mr. Bell opened his leather packet and removed a folded paper. The payments appear under a false household account, Your Grace. If asked, I would call that concealment. Vale turned toward him. You would call it whatever your client paid you to call it. Mr. Bell's spectacles flashed in the candlelight. My client is the law, sir. It is less flattering than a duke, but rather more durable. A nervous murmur travelled along the table. Clara lifted the rent roll next. Now the West cottages. 3 families marked in arrears, though receipts were issued upon collection. 2 receipts bear tenant marks. Those marks were supposedly witnessed by your clerk. Vale's jaw tightened. In this parish, Clara said, those who cannot sign make their cross before a witness. Mr. Bell has the parish clerk's statement. He never saw these marks made. She placed the forged papers one by one beside the tureen. Forks lay forgotten, plates cooled. At the far end, Alaric's face had become a locked door with something burning behind it. "Enough," Vale said. Clara reached for the final sheet. Serafina rose. Her chair scraped the floor. "You vindictive little creature." Alaric's hand struck the table once. "Sit down." Serafina stared at him as if he had slapped her. For the first time, he did not correct himself. A footman entered then, carrying a sealed note upon a tray. "It had come from the village," he whispered, "from the apothecary's boy." Clara saw Vale's eyes move to it. She took the note but did not break the seal. Not yet. Vale stepped from behind Alaric's chair. His voice softened, and that softness turned the room colder. "Your Grace, I had hoped to spare the Duchess this embarrassment, but since she insists upon this theatre, I must speak plainly. Her condition is not merely of the lungs. Her nerves are disordered. She hides papers. She refuses medicine. She believes herself persecuted by every person appointed to protect her." Clara's fingers tightened around the sealed note. Alaric stood slowly. "Choose your next words with care." Vale bowed toward the door. "I have chosen the proper witness instead." The dining room doors opened. Dr. Hessel entered with his black bag in hand, his spectacles low on his nose, and a prepared certificate folded beneath his fingers. The physician had come to bury her alive. Dr. Hessel's black bag struck the dining room floor with a soft, final thud, and every flame in the candelabras seemed to lean away from him. He unfolded the certificate with clean physician's fingers. Clara knew those fingers. They had measured her pulse in London without once looking at her face. They had prescribed rest, quiet, obedience, and bottles dark enough to hide whatever swam inside them. Now they smoothed the paper that was meant to make her vanish while she still breathed. "Her Grace suffers from nervous excitement," Dr. Hessel said. "Delusions of persecution, refusal of prescribed medicine, improper fixation upon household accounts. In my professional opinion—" "No," Clara said. The single word cut through the room. Vale's mouth curled. "There, you see the agitation." Clara broke the seal of the apothecary's note she had held since the footman brought it. Her thumb left a crescent in the wax. She read once, then passed the paper to Mr. Bell. The solicitor's brows rose. "Read it aloud," Clara said. Mr. Bell adjusted his spectacles. "From Mr. Abel Trench, apothecary's assistant of Ravensmere village. He states that Dr. Hessel ordered tincture of opium, foxglove powder, and antimonial wine to be mixed into cordial draughts for her Grace, with instruction that the bottles be labelled as strengthening, restorative." Martha made a small choking sound against the wall. Dr. Hessel's face reddened. "An assistant misunderstands what he compounds. Ladies' medicines often contain opiates. Godfrey's cordial is given even to infants." "And foxglove?" Clara asked. "For lungs?" He had no answer ready enough. Alaric's hand closed slowly around the back of his chair. The knuckles whitened. "Hessel." The physician looked to Vale. That look was the crack in the wall. Mrs. Wren stepped forward. Her cap trembled, but her voice did not. "I saw Mr. Vale pour the draught into her Grace's cup after she refused it. Martha saw him bring the bottle from his locked cabinet. Nan heard him say she would be easier once she slept through the morning. Nan, white as linen, bobbed a terrified curtsy. "I did, Your Grace. I swear it before God." Vale laughed once. "Kitchen girls and frightened maids. Is this your court, Duchess?" "No," Clara said. "This is." She turned toward Mrs. Wren. The housekeeper left the dining room without permission. Every eye followed her absence. Vale shifted his weight. Serafina's fan had stopped moving altogether. The wait lasted less than 5 minutes, but it seemed to age the room. When Mrs. Wren returned, she carried the blood-stained ledger, wrapped in chapel cloth. Damp dust clung to the binding. A splinter of old floorboard had caught in the leather seam. Clara took it with both hands and opened it before the candles. "The original ledger," Mr. Bell said quietly. Vale stepped forward. Alaric moved faster and blocked him. "Stand where you are," the Duke said. Vale stopped. Clara turned the pages. "Here are the hidden payments to Serafina Vale. Here are the duplicated rents. Here are the forged tenant marks. Here are the apothecary charges entered before I arrived at Ravensmere. Seraphina rose so quickly, her chair struck the wall behind her. Alaric, surely you won't permit this spectacle. He did not look at her. Mr. Bell unfolded another document from his packet. The Duchess's marriage settlement placed certain funds in trust for her separate use. That clause gives her Grace lawful standing to challenge misuse connected to her allowance and household maintenance. A husband may command much, Your Grace, but he may not forge trustees into silence. The words landed one by one. Alaric looked at Clara, then at the ledger, then at the stained handkerchief she had set beside the papers without knowing she had done it. His face changed not with softness, but with ruin. How long? He asked. Clara's hand rested on the open page. Since the road from London. The room held still. He had bought a bride and nearly delivered her to death. The first warning Clara had received on the road from London returned to her with the force of a bell. Do not drink what Vale gives you. That note had not been spite. It had not been madness. It had been the first hand reaching toward her from beneath the floor of a house built on silence. Who wrote the warning? Alaric asked. Vale's mouth tightened. Clara reached into the ledger and drew out the small folded note she had carried since the first carriage ride. The paper had grown soft at the creases. The ink had blurred at the edges, but the 7 words remained. She placed it on the table before him. Alaric read it, his face drained of all remaining pride. Who wrote it? He said again, and this time his voice did not belong to a duke, but to a man standing at the mouth of a grave he had helped dig. John Pike stepped forward from the wall. His cap was crushed in both hands, but he did not lower his eyes. Mrs. Alder did, Your Grace. Before she disappeared. She gave it to me months ago and said if another lady was sent here sick, I was to see it found her. Mrs. Wren opened the ledger to a page marked with thread. Mrs. Alder questioned the same payments. 2 days later, Mr. Vale said she had gone to her sister. She left her Bible, her shawl, and her wedding ring in her drawer. The room shifted with a low sound of anger. Vale's composure peeled away. Servants' tales. Mr. Bell stepped beside Clara and laid the marriage settlement flat upon the table. Not merely tales. Her Grace's separate allowance was protected under trusteeship. These payments passed through accounts connected to her household maintenance. That gives the Duchess lawful ground to challenge every false charge and every person who drew upon it. Seraphina laughed, too high and too sharp. Lawful ground? She is his wife. Mr. Bell looked at her over his spectacles. Even a wife may have papers a thief cannot eat. Alaric pushed back his chair. The sound struck the room like a shot. Vale turned toward the side door, but John Pike reached it first. Dr. Hessel clutched his black bag to his chest. Seraphina tried to pull free of Mrs. Wren, silk whispering furiously as her reticule slipped open farther. A second folded receipt fell out. This one stamped by a London jeweller for a pearl bracelet with a black enamel clasp. Clara remembered it at once. Seraphina had worn it at the wedding breakfast, resting her hand on Alaric's chair while Clara sat with a sealed letter beneath her plate and no husband beside her. Alaric picked up the receipt and stared at the entry. Paid from Ravensmere discretion account. The room watched him understand that his wife had been sent to rot in a house that had been feeding his mistress in pearls. Seraphina's voice shook. Alaric, you cannot believe them. I believed you too long, he said. The parish constable entered with 2 officers behind him, rain still dark upon their shoulders. Mr. Bell had summoned them before dinner, and now their boots stood upon the Wexford carpet, without asking permission from anyone but the truth. Alaric looked at Vale. Edmund Vale, you are dismissed from my service and from every Wexford account. Vale sneered. You gave me authority, and I now give them yours. The officers took him by the arms. Dr. Hessel protested about professional judgment, feminine weakness, and medicines common to every sick room, until Martha lifted the empty cordial bottle from the sideboard and placed it beside the apothecary's note. The physician stopped speaking. Seraphina tried once more for the door. Mrs. Wren did not yield an inch. No, my lady, she said, her red hands locked around the reticule. You have left enough rooms untouched. Alaric turned to Clara then, slowly, in front of tenants, servants, gentry, magistrates' men, and the woman who had mocked her breath at the altar. The Duke of Wexford lowered himself to one knee beside the table, not to propose, not to command, not to perform gallantry, to answer. "I bought you for £8,000, he said, and the words seemed to scrape his throat raw. "I called it necessity. I called it order. I sent you here and told myself silence was mercy." Clara stood with one hand upon the ledger, her wedding ring still loose, no longer a symbol of being unwanted, but a reminder of what had failed to hold her down. Alaric bowed his head. "You were not the weakness in this house," he said. "You were the only strength I sent into it." Clara did not reach for him. The servants did not look away. The wound that had begun in wet wool, cold stone, and candle smoke did not vanish. It changed shape. It became witness. It became record. It became the table around which no one could lie safely again. Serafina fought like a woman who had never expected a servant's hands to touch her. Her reticule snapped open beneath Mrs. Wren's grip, spilling a vinaigrette, a lace handkerchief, 2 sovereigns, and the jeweller's receipt onto the dining room floor. The evidence lay there beside the ledger, small, damning, and impossible to make elegant. No one moved until Clara bent and picked up the receipt. Serafina's face lost its colour. "That is mine. Then you will have no objection to its being kept," Clara said. The room altered, not loudly, not with shouting. It changed as a pond changed when ice broke beneath a foot. Alaric took the receipt from Clara and read it himself. Once, twice. The second time his mouth tightened so hard the scar near his temple whitened. Dr. Hessel reached for his black bag. "I must protest." "You will protest before the magistrates," Alaric said. Vale stepped back. A footman blocked the side door before he reached it. John Pike moved in front of the servants' passage, cap gone now, shoulders squared. The tenants near the sideboard shifted closer together, not as witnesses any longer, but as men who had carried arrears, hunger, and threats in silence too long. Mr. Bell folded the physician's certificate and placed it beside the ledger. "Your Grace, the parish constable is already here. I took the liberty of sending for him when the apothecary's note arrived." Vale's eyes flashed toward him. "You meddling old viper. Accurate paperwork often feels like venom to dishonest men." A sound came from the next room. Boots on the flagstones, iron-tipped staffs, the low murmur of men removing hats before entering a nobleman's house. In country districts, a magistrate's warrant could turn a gentleman's dining room into a place of accusation as surely as any court, and the polished silver on the table did not soften the charge. Alaric looked at Vale. "You are dismissed from Ravensmere, from every Wexford account, and from every acre under my seal." Vale laughed, but it came out thin. "You cannot wash your hands so neatly, Your Grace. You placed her in my keeping." The words struck their mark. Alaric flinched. Clara watched it happen and gave him no rescue from it. The officers took Vale by the arms. He resisted once, then mastered himself, as if dignity could hide, wrists held too tightly. At the door he turned his head toward Clara. "You think houses remember gratitude," he said. "They remember blood." Mrs. Wren stepped forward. "Then Ravensmere will remember yours first." Vale was taken from Ravensmere before midnight. He left by the servants' entrance, the same passage through which he had tried to make others disappear, and the rain struck his face without respect for his former authority. Dr. Hessel followed under guard, protesting about misunderstanding, dosage, professional judgment, and female nerves until the dining room doors closed upon his voice. By morning, the village had learned that nervous excitement had not been Clara's illness. Greed had been Ravensmere's. Serafina Vale was not dragged away. Society did something colder. The neighbouring ladies rose one by one and refused her farewell. No carriage was offered. No hostess spoke comfort. She departed in a hired chaise after dawn, her cream furs damp at the hem, her pearls wrapped in evidence paper on Mr. Bell's desk. In the great hall, Alaric restored Clara's authority before everyone who had seen her stripped of it. "Let all present hear me," he said. "Her Grace, Clara, Duchess of Wexford, holds full authority over Ravensmere's household, accounts, tenants, stores and repairs. No order shall override hers unless she gives it leave. Every servant wage owed will be paid before sunrise. Every tenant wrongfully charged will be repaid. Mr. Bell will oversee the books until Her Grace appoints another steward. Clara lowered her eyes to the ledger, then closed it with both hands protected. At last, when the room began to empty, Alaric remained by the cold hearth rain-tapping at the dark windows behind him. Clara gathered the papers slowly. Her bruised wrist ached beneath her sleeve, but her fingers were steady. "Clara," he said. She did not turn until the last servant had gone. He stood without pride now, with nothing in his hands, not even an excuse. "Is there any road by which you could forgive me?" Clara looked at the man who had bought her, hidden her, doubted her, and at last spoken truth where everyone could hear it. "When Ravensmere no longer shivers at your name," she said, "ask me again." Spring came to Ravensmere first as a smell. Thawing earth, wet timber, coal smoke fading from chimneys that had no longer needed to beg for warmth. 3 months after the dinner of receipts, Clara stood in the West cottages with mud on the hem of her gown and a builder's chalk mark across one glove. The roof above Mrs. Hartley's cradle no longer leaked. New slate lay dark and clean against the pale morning, and the mason's boy whistled from the ladder, while Mrs. Hartley held her infant up to see the light entering through glass that had been mended instead of stuffed with rags. "Your Grace should not stand in the draught," Mrs. Hartley said. Clara looked up at the new beam, ran her fingers over the planed wood, and smiled without surrendering the inspection. "If the draught remains, Mr. Wilkes has not earned his pay," the mason laughed from the ladder. "Your Grace has a sharper eye than my master." "My master taught me," Clara said, then crossed another item from the list. At Ravensmere, lists had become laws. Coal stores, tenant roofs, kitchen accounts, linen inventories, wages, schoolroom slates, seed grain, drainage ditches, apothecary supplies. Everything had a place in ink now. Lady Day had passed, the old quarter day when rents were counted and agreements renewed, and for the first time in years, no tenant had stood in the hall with a cap crushed in both hands and fear behind the eyes. Mr. Bell had sent 3 clerks to sort the old books. Vale awaited trial in York. Dr. Hessel's patients had scattered to other physicians. As for Lady Seraphina, London had not buried her, but it had done something crueler. It had stopped inviting her. Clara read none of those reports aloud. One unopened letter still lay in the drawer of her writing desk, bearing the hand of a Duchess from Mayfair, who had once placed Seraphina at the centre of every dinner table. Mrs. Wren had brought it that morning with raised brows. "Will your Grace answer?" "Not today. It may contain an apology, then it will keep." Clara closed the drawer and turned back to the work before her. By April, the old laundry had been cleared, scrubbed, and remade into a small infirmary beside the kitchen court. There were 6 narrow beds, shelves of clean linen, jars of lavender, water, lint rolled tight in brown paper, fever mixtures prepared by the village apothecary, and a locked cabinet to which Clara kept one key and Mrs. Wren the other. No bottle entered the room without its contents written in the book. The first patient was not Clara. That alone was victory. Alaric came often to the infirmary, though never without asking. At first, he stood in doorways as if the house itself refused him. He spoke to tenants by name from lists he had clearly studied. He paid arrears from his own London accounts. He dismissed men who had profited by fear and hired those who could meet Clara's eyes. He did not ask forgiveness again. That restraint unsettled her, more than pleading would have done. One morning, she found him in the estate room before breakfast, sleeves turned back, copying tenant repairs into the new daybook. A streak of ink marked the side of his hand. The Duke of Wexford, who had once treated signatures as weapons, now sanded pages at his wife's desk, with the care of a clerk afraid to blot the truth. Clara paused at the threshold. "You have mistaken the hour for penance." He looked up. The spring light had softened the hard lines of his face, though not erased them. "No, penance asks to be seen. This is work." She crossed the room and looked down at the page. The figures were correct. "You missed the mill roof." "I did not. It waits on your approval." Clara touched the edge of the book. "You might have signed it yourself." I might have done many things myself, he said. That is how Ravensmere became what it was. A sound moved through the open window. Wheels on gravel, servants laughing in the yard, Nan scolding a stable boy, twice her size. The house no longer listened in fear, it breathed around them. Alaric reached into his coat and took out the Duchy seal. Heavy silver, Wexford arms. The same authority that had once sent her north as a burden. He placed it in Clara's palm, not on the desk, not between them, in her hand. You are not my obligation, he said. You are my equal. If Ravensmere is to bear my name, it must first answer to yours. Clara looked at the seal, then at the man who had learned to stand without taking the room. Her fingers closed around the silver. Outside, at the repaired gates, the tenants had begun to gather for the first morning of planting. Clara walked out to meet them with the Duchy seal in her hand and the keys at her waist. The gates of Ravensmere stood straight now, their iron hinges oiled, their stone posts scrubbed clean of moss. Tenants passed beneath them with loaves wrapped in cloth, coals stacked in carts, and sacks of seed ready for the softened fields. Mrs. Hartley came with her child bundled against her shoulder. John Pike led the first wagon. Martha carried a basket of clean bandages to the infirmary, and Nan followed with both arms full of linen, walking proudly as if the path itself belonged to her. Alaric stopped a few paces behind Clara, close enough to stand with her, far enough to let the gathering eyes find her first. The morning smelled of wet earth, bread and smoke. Beneath the edge of Clara's gown, snowdrops broke through the thawing ground, white and stubborn against the last dark crust of winter. The girl bought to be hidden had become the woman no one could govern without. Clara turned toward the house that had once tried to bury her alive and walked back through its open doors. The keys at her waist touched softly together with every step. Thank you for watching Clara's complete story. A story about a woman who was bought to be hidden, then became the strength that saved an entire house. If this ending satisfied you, please like the video because it helps the algorithm bring this kind of historical romance drama to more people who love wronged heroines, proud dukes, betrayal, redemption, and powerful reversals. Share this story with someone who enjoys Regency or Victorian romance filled with secrets and reckoning. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next full story. And tell me in the comments, would you have forgiven Alaric or made him spend years earning it?